All right, welcome to the Salt City Hoops live postcast. Glad to have you here. All right. I'll mute that so we don't get that echo. That was embarrassing. Well, hey, welcome to the show. Jazz are 4-1. They just completed a home and home with Houston on Monday, Wednesday, and got a victory and a loss out of it. Both teams won their home games. I think they played out kind of how I expected against a youthful, very fast Houston Rockets team. But because it's Wednesday, that means we're having beer because we always have beer on these postcasts. So let me crack open the beer you see on the screen. I'm drinking an Imperial Porter tonight. 3-layer cake porter. Got notes of strawberry, chocolate, vanilla, almond. Also has raspberry and lactose. So we're enjoying a little hefty 9.3er. Cheers to you all out there. I'll show this on camera for you guys. It's awfully delicious. Happy to be here. All right, so got a home and home to talk about with Houston, and I might get into some of the other game that we had on Monday. But for now, we can talk about probably not one of the more aesthetic wins or enjoyable games you're going to see Utah play. Not because of the Jazz being a worse team or anything in that vein, but more because there were 58 fouls called today. And if you're not too familiar with how many fouls are typically called in a game, you might see 40, right? 40 is a pretty normal amount. Utah had 28, Houston had 30. It was not imbalanced one way or another. Houston had so a total of 58 fouls, and Utah had 2 players foul out. Mike Conley was in foul trouble pretty much all game, but he was still able to get 27 minutes out of it because Will Hardy also lost Colin Sexton due to injury. Looked like a mild oblique strain, one of your side ab muscles for you non anatomy knowers. So Mike Conley was kind of forced to be pressed into action a little bit, but with Conley in foul trouble and with Sexton out of the game, had to see a little bit more Taylor Horton-Tucker a little bit more today. So we'll talk about his performance today. We'll talk about Markkanen's steady hand. I think easily the best player today. Clarkson was, I think, just the best version of himself on from years past, but also for this year's squad of just a little bit more responsibility and owning it. It's always been notable that when Clarkson has been forced into a stronger team role, maybe not necessarily a scoring role, right, with players like Markkanen and to a lesser extent Malik Beasley and Kelly Olynyk, and we have some good wide scoring on this team, but he's tasked to have more run the offense responsibility, cause a bunch of shit to happen defensively. He's really stepped up in some of these games, so these early season games so far, defensively, offensively, and not just doing the thing we all love him for, which is, hey, second unit, we're really struggling. Can you please just jack up a shot? And your very difficult shots can milk the clock from the lead that our starters have done, have given us, and can you just try to run an efficient offense and try not to blow it defensively? He's not that player anymore. He's a way more I hate to use the word mature because that implies something about his immature status on the team or anything like that. But it's definitely an evolution into a more steady hand, offensively and defensively. That's been really fun to see. So he was fabulous today. I mentioned on the screen we got Taylor Horton-Tucker doing a 14-7-4, largely because of more responsibility and more license to jack up shots. I will have plenty to say about my favorite player on the team shortly. Pretty soon, if this thing ends up catching up and I have a few people listening to this, I might need to tone down the hate on Taylor Horton-Tucker because he is a professional basketball player after all. I did mention Jared Vanderbilt fouled out. A lot of silly fouls from him, but his 19 minutes were extremely enjoyable to watch. Except we saw the worst of Jared Vanderbilt's ability to stay on the floor. Walker Kessler, I think, struggled mightily today. Malik Beasley, I thought maybe had his best game of the season. We'll talk about him a little bit. I think for sure. Kelly Olynyk, I think, was way better than his stat line indicates, but you certainly didn't feel him against his old team. He didn't play for Houston for very long, but it is one of the teams he did play for. And I think the story overall, if we want to get into maybe sort of like the what I was looking for in these two Houston games, is Houston is all speed all the time. And they're full of youth, but it isn't just like their youthfulness of, okay, they're fast because they're youthful is what I'm trying to say. They are straight up fast players. Jalen Green might be the fastest player in the league. We've heard time and time again from Holly Rowe how fast Colin Sexton is, and Jalen Green is twice as fast as him. He is all speed, all dribble, all the time. Very electric player. He's going to be a star point guard in this league pretty shortly. His shooting has really improved. But everyone else along the roster, right? So Jabari Smith, Auburn teammate of Walker Kessler, very fast player at the 4-5, right? And then you get these guys coming off the bench who, like Garrison Matthews, is a run around the perimeter shooting threes. He's impossible to keep up with, and we had some defenders really struggle to keep up with him today. KJ Martin at the power forward position, right? He is not his dad, which is kind of like a pure center, but he's got all of his athleticism, right? He's a very fast player. And of course, Kevin Porter, who just got his massive contract extension with Houston. Electric, fast player running down the court. He beat a lot of Utah players down the court in the half fast break. Oftentimes throughout this game. So Houston, very fast team, and especially off the dribble too, right? So both of these games, Kevin Porter and Jalen Green, they were facing a Utah defense that often switched the actions, and you ended up with Jalen Green or Kevin Porter on a Lauri Markkanen, on a Kelly Olynyk. And those guys have been more impressive defensively than I anticipated, especially Markkanen. I think we all kind of know Olynyk's brand of defense at this point, which is he's got some smarts, can stay in front of guys and kind of anticipate moves, but he's really just going to try to do some bullshit charge drawing. He's going to try to not always get the most vertical, but just try to make the shots difficult for players using what athleticism he has to his disposal. But even if those guys weren't going up against Utah's big men, they were going up against players who just weren't going to stay in front of those guys. And what I've appreciated about Utah's defense before the first Houston game that they lost a couple nights ago was this team was willing to admit almost that they did not quite have it defensively to just lock down a guy. I'm going to sit down this player against that player, and we can really siphon off that end of the court, or the pick and roll against these two defenders is never going to work because we have a great big man who can defend both actions, and we got a tall or a large point guard or a guard defender who can really muck up actions. There's none of that. Instead, Utah has committed to the frenetic style defense that you might be familiar with a team like the Timberwolves played last year, right, where they admitted that they don't have the defenders on that team, but if they kind of moved a bunch of guys around and willing to overhedge and make guys make tough decisions, double teaming guys when they weren't expecting it, forcing ball handlers to make tough decisions, Utah has forced the second most turnovers in the league up to this point, in part because they were making ball handlers who were kind of thinking, okay, I'm playing against bad Utah defenders, I'm going to be able to get by my guy, we'll set an easy pick and roll, this will be easy. Instead, they're forced to making tough decisions, and their first pass that they look to is being covered by an athletic Jazz defender, just like a Jared Vanderbilt, like flying in the area, right? And so that's been really enjoyable to watch. And Houston, against Houston, it's almost like that style stopped a lot of the time. They committed to it throughout. I think Jared Vanderbilt did a nice job, kind of doing his Jared Vanderbilt thing, but the rest of the team didn't kind of follow suit like they usually have been. And I think that's been the result of that is you saw a lot of blow-bys or a lot of athletic moves to get wide open shots, or the only people who were collapsing on a penetrating ball handler that was easily got by their defender. There wasn't a lot of other frenetic action on the back end, and you'd still end up with wide open shots. I think Utah could have won that first game with a little bit better three-point shooting. That was a little bit fluky, but you're just going to have those bad shooting nights. And there are two things that I think that you have to, if you're going to be a good team, that you need to overcome every night to get wins. And that is fluky outside shooting and referees, right? Both of those things are never going to be things that you can rely on. They will always normalize out over the course of a game, especially a 7-game series. You have to be good enough to win those games despite those factors. And Utah certainly wasn't good enough on Monday night with that, especially defensively. Tonight, obviously, they had pretty decent shooting. It still wasn't the greatest shooting night for them. From deep, only 29% from three. But overall, I thought the defense was a little bit more sound, except for stretches in the fourth quarter. But I was really happy with their commit. So they were often switching defensively against the very fast Rockets ball handlers, just trying to slow them down a bit, right? Because if you're not going to switch, especially with Utah's poor sort of individual defenders or pick and roll knowledge defense, right? Like that pick and roll defense takes a while to learn who you're working with as a team unit defensively, and they're still working on it. But there was a little bit more smart freneticism on the back end that I thought really worked well to force a couple bad decisions. And then all of a sudden you get to the third, fourth quarter when Houston goes on, I think it was a 16-3 run. You end up with just blowing by guys, getting layups, and just hoping that they miss almost. Lots of fouls. Obviously, I mentioned that. I do not think, and a lot of comments on Twitter were remarking on how poorly officiated this game was. I thought there was sloppy contact everywhere. This was a very poor performance by both teams as far as the contact they were giving. The screens that were set by both teams were very bad. Houston's playing without Bruno Fernando and Alperen Şengün. They're two starting centers. Şengün is really the better center of the two, but they because he's a much slower player, they like him kind of initiating that second unit offense instead of playing with the high-flying Jalen Green and Kevin Porter. But they were without both of them, and those are experienced centers. Fernando's not great, but he's probably way better of a center than they had, and so they started Jabari Smith at the 5, and you're really trying to rely on Jabari Smith as a small ball 5. He's definitely has the tools to play the 5, but he's kind of he's a skinnier, shorter version of Jaren Jackson Jr. on that end, right? So you really don't want him to play the 5 exclusively, except if you're getting into crunch time and you're thinking, okay, we just need somebody who can protect the rim back there. And I say that because the guys that Houston were forced to rely on to set screens, they sucked at it. They were committing very poor screens. They were getting called on it. And then on the other end for Utah, Kelly Olynyk hasn't set a good screen in his entire career, I don't think. I used to really bitch and moan about it when he was in Miami, whenever I watched him in the playoffs, right? And especially during his Boston stint. He just does not set clean screens, and now he has a reputation in the league for setting poor screens. And so the dude fouls out. I think he had 2 of his fouls were screens, illegal screens, and that's really frustrating to watch for him. And Jared Vanderbilt, for all his benefits, there's a lot of things about Jared Vanderbilt that are just not NBA ready. We talk about the things that he's amazing at, and that he's absolutely an NBA player, probably an NBA starter, but his shooting is not NBA ready yet, right? Love the 2 threes he hit the other night. It was a great surprise. Love seeing him just try to explore that a little bit, see if that's a thing he can do. If he gets on tape with a couple makes on 3, maybe that kind of confuses offenses even further as they have to come into town to play the Jazz, right? What the fuck is this Utah Jazz team? Jared Vanderbilt shooting 3s? But it's certainly not part of his game yet, and that's certainly not going to happen yet. And as the only non-shooter on the floor, whenever Vanderbilt's on the floor, he's the only non-shooter, right? So Will Hardy's very careful never to play Vanderbilt with Walker Kessler, right? Talen Horton-Tucker also can't shoot, but takes the shots, and being a willing shooter is almost more valuable at times on a struggling spacing unit than just willing and missing those shots, it can be more valuable than being an okay shooter who doesn't shoot, right? Harken back to Joe Ingles' first 2 years with Utah, how teams would leave him wide open because there was a good chance he was just going to pass the fucking ball wide open, right? So Talen Horton-Tucker, even if he's on the floor as a quote-unquote non-shooter, he's going to take those shots, and so he has value there. So Vanderbilt, as the only non-shooter on the floor, ends up being the screen setter in a lot of these offensive actions. Sure enough, 3 offensive fouls today setting screens. Actually, I think of 2 were screens, and 1 was like an offensive foul immediately after the screen where he pushed a guy. Very frenetic player who he's kind of always on the balls of his feet, which is really helpful, but can really put him in some tricky situations when he's just not defending a guy. So he gets put in off-ball actions that he ends up pushing a guy or ramming through a screen. Very few of his fouls that get called are straight up fouling a guy going for a basket, right? He does commit a couple of those, and he's got to contain himself a little bit better on that end for sure against players shooting the basketball. But at the same time, he's fouling out, and he's committing all these fouls for Utah because of everything else. So he's got a lot to learn to be NBA ready at setting screens, at diving to the cup. His finishing around the basket's really poor. He can't shoot. Right now, he's a guy that injects the life into to allow every other player that he plays with, like a Lauri Markkanen or a Jordan Clarkson or Malik Beasley. He makes all those guys better because of the turnovers he creates, the rebounds he's able to get offensively and defensively. He's putting these players who aren't great players in really great positions to succeed 8, 9, 10 times a game. It's really, really helpful. So he's absolutely an NBA player. I love having him start. I think he, going against great teams like we've seen the first 3 games, he's really helpful against those teams that just aren't expecting that he's the best player on the floor as far as like rebounding is concerned against every single one of the teams we've played so far. Maybe not with respect to the standard rebounding prowess of Rudy Gobert or Nikola Jokic, but he's the guy who's going to get those difficult rebounds as opposed to every other wing on the floor, power forward. And so he's creating those extremely good opportunities. There's just a lot else that we need to expect out of him. And I'm hoping that this explore the studio space year for Utah gives Vanderbilt some actual development, because if we end up with the same Jared Vanderbilt in game 82 as we started with game 1, I'm really going to be pessimistic about that, right? And so then you have to demote Jared Vanderbilt's future as 8th man, 9th man, energy guy off the bench. But you still have to be careful about what lineups you put him in. So just something I note for him as he fouls out today. And what compounded Kelly Olynyk and Jared Vanderbilt fouling out was I thought Walker Kessler was, for the first game of this young season, I thought he looked really lost. His rebounding was not great. Marjanovic for Houston played for 2 minutes, matched up against Kessler, and Kessler just was out physicaled in those 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes didn't particularly matter for the game, but I like to note where Kessler is as a player, and Marjanovic is obviously a tough cover as a young guy, but he didn't look great against him. He missed a wide open layup at one point when he found himself lost defensively, looking to see who he had to box out. And I think a lot of Utah had a lot of problems with boxing out. There were a lot of pretty good offensive rebounds for Houston as they were slashing and cutting, and I think Utah's aggressive switching defense left some weird mismatches, and they got confused who they were boxing out. Kessler was a victim of that a couple times, so he played, I think, his season low of minutes today, of just 11 minutes, and only had 1 rebound to show for it. Had a nice block today. He's always going to, like, his prowess defending the rim is still absolutely notable. Can rely on him for that. Talen Horton, pause for a second to take a beer here. Thank you for joining, by the way. Salt City Hoops live postcast. I've done a lot of chatting right in a row. Got my beer here, 3-layer porter from Four Noses here in Colorado. I drink a lot of stuff from Four Noses, so you'll see them a lot in the bottom of the screen for Four Noses, but that's because they make all sorts of great stuff. They don't stretch themselves thin as a brewery. where they just make every beer under the sun, but they make a lot of different styles and really kick ass at all of them. My top beers that they make are a Czech lager. It's one of my favorite styles of beer. They have the best pumpkin beer I've ever had in my life, the Pump Action. Obviously, friends who've watched this podcast last year know that I drink these 3-layer porters all the time because they are dessert. I can drink 1 or 2 of these and just have a great night. And so it's Wednesday. We got a home and home with the Rockets. Got the win. We're 4-1. 4-1. I'm going to say my thoughts about tanking because I've talked about that for 3 different shows now. And I'm writing about it this week, so I'll be writing my thoughts on what it means for this Jazz team to tank and what does it mean if the Jazz win 30 games, 35 games? Like, what does that actually mean, do to our ethos? But I think the only thing I'll say that I have repeated in the past 3 shows is, man, just fuck off if you're not having fun, man. Like, I've seen some tweets today who are like, I'm watching the game or I'm at the game, but I'm not having fun. I can barely find myself watching this game, even if I'm at the game. And it's, all right, man, good for you. Find something else to do. I hear Netflix has some new shows out, right? Like, if you don't want to enjoy this Jazz team, then I often tell people go have a beer. So go literally do anything else. The negative energy around this team right now when they're 4-1 is just really stupid and unenjoyable. And if you want to tune back in March when after Conley's traded or whatever and we get 48 minutes of Nickeil Alexander-Walker running point guard, then all right, well, welcome back. Like, we can talk about it then. But right now, as the crowd actually does look sold out and both home games have looked really enjoyable for the fans and the kids, right? Everyone seems to be having a good time. Danny Ainge always looks miserable sitting right behind Will Hardy and trying to wear whatever horrible Jazz gear he's forced to wear that day that matches the current aesthetic. Everyone else seems to be really having fun, though. And if you're not having fun watching this team and you're still turning on your TV or you're paying for a ticket, I encourage you to go outside or do literally anything else because I don't think your negative energy is particularly appreciated around here. Objective, reasonable thoughts about what this means for the future of the Jazz if they keep winning. Of course, those are always great comments. But if you're just going to sit there and mew and bitch about it, then I don't think we really have time for you. Last player I'll talk about to really keep the positive energy going is Talen Horton-Tucker, who 14 points, 5-11 from the field, 2 of 7 from 3, 7 rebounds, a lot of big rebounds for him today. He played a lot today, and he threw his big butt around and really caught some good rebounds. It's always been something I will never really have an issue with his rebounding. 4 assists. I think all 4 of his assists came when he was falling down. 2 steals, no turnovers, which is a stunner. And I want to say a team leading +8 because Sexton was +10 in 10 minutes today before he got hurt. But because Sexton didn't play his usual allotment of minutes, I kind of discount that +10 a little bit because you don't know what that would have looked like throughout. So team leading +8 for Talen Horton-Tucker. Talen Horton-Tucker attempted a dribble step back 3 today that didn't even come close. That is Talen Horton-Tucker. He attempted 7 threes today. Went 2 of 7. I said this just now. I do not mind it if it comes within the flow of the offense and you're causing a defense to think, oh, that's a guard forward type player out there who is definitely going to shoot this ball. I need to think about it. In the early going before the Jazz really get scouted, that can be a good play. That's okay. The problem is a lot of those 7 3-point attempts come as selfish, not within the offense, plenty of time on the clock, just this is my possession. What I thought Horton-Tucker was much better at today, as opposed to prior nights, was he did not dribble the air out of the ball and commit weird dribble moves, falling over and turning the ball over. 0 turnovers is really big for him. He made clear directions as to where he was going with the basketball, and if his path to the lane was closed off, he took the responsibility to say, this play needs to be reset. Or he gets to a spot on the floor, he gets walled off from going all the way to the rim, and there was one time today, I actually didn't mind a turnaround mid-range step back he had, because he gets to about 12 feet from the rim. He had Kevin Porter Jr. or some other guard-type player on him, and with his long arms and his size, he's able to really do a long pivot and have this real deep fadeaway. And I didn't love the shot. There was probably 12 or 13 seconds left on the shot clock. And you don't want that to be the arsenal of shots that he's getting off. But, and not just because it went in, but I noted it because he got a ton of space. He really created a ton of space between him and the defender. And if you want to create mid-range shots, you got to do it like Rudy Gay does. Get a lot of space between you and the defender. Like, that ends up being an okay shot if that's part of your game. What's not part of your game is dribble step back threes, and we saw a couple of those today, and it really pissed me off. But the no turnovers, that's what I care about. If you're going to dribble the basketball, and Will Hardy ostensibly relies on you to do that, I need you to be reliable and not do the world's slowest spin move or do a behind the back dribble that is like 7 feet wide because you can't keep it tight to your body. It's just not your game. I like your idea. I like the idea of him as a power dribbler and have a good handle on the ball with one hand, maybe do a small crossover. Not to fake a guy out of his shoes, but maybe just to move, like take that big body of yours and transition it to another side and get a layup with your long arms. That is what he can do. I love his physicality going to the rim at times. I don't love his reverse layups. Today, he goes to the rim. We all saw it. Fast break. He has the rim wide open. He's got puny Jalen Green going. I mean, he's got a great vertical. So Jalen Green's going to contest the shot. But he's a small, skinny guy. And I was beside myself watching Talen Horton-Tucker do this crazy reverse layup. And he's hit a couple of these reverse layups this year, and maybe I just have to recalibrate that it's actually a decent shot for him. But none of them have looked good, and especially that one, because that's something that he should just power over Jalen Green and get the layup, maybe get a foul call, right? And contrast that with the dunk that he had today, where he did get the foul. That dunk was pretty massive, where he just said, hey, I'm going up and I'm yamming this thing. That's what we want to see out of him. And if he can end up being, a 33% three-point shooter instead of the 25% three-point shooter he is, he, based on his role on the units he plays in, he's never in the corner. He's almost always on the wings. If he can shoot and above the break threes are more difficult, right? If he can shoot those at a 33% clip, not turn the ball over very much and just have a little bit tighter handle, I'll be okay with it. Right now, he's just gross to watch, and I'm glad he had a positive impact on today's game, especially in his 28 minutes with Sexton getting injured and Mike Conley having to be in foul trouble. And depending on how much rest we give Conley and how long Sexton is out, we might see a lot more of him. We saw some talk that Nickeil Alexander-Walker should play, or even Leandro Bolmaro. I think Bolmaro is a pretty terrible NBA player. I don't think you really want him on the floor right now. He needs to learn a lot of actual NBA skill to be on the floor. And Alexander Walker, we've seen already in New Orleans what happens when you put him as the point guard for a team that's still trying to figure out their offensive identity. You'd end up in a much worse spot. I'd much rather have, if you're in point guard trouble, having a split backcourt between Horton-Tucker and Jordan Clarkson, right? And having Jordan Clarkson be your offensive ball handling fulcrum, and then Horton-Tucker can be that secondary ball handler type that you're just kind of clenching your butthole hoping he doesn't turn the ball over. But I still trust Horton-Tucker better than Alexander Walker at this point. So I think that's the summary of these two games. Friday, we'll be at Denver. And those of you know, I live in Denver. I will be right behind the bench in Denver. I will be telling JC that I'm wearing my finest Lulus. So you'll be seeing me on the floor. But we do have a request from the chat, so I will take that from my friend Andrew Streeter. So let's get this one going. Andrew, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, man. Living the dream. Doing really well. Yeah, so I'm glad that I was wondering if you were going to talk about your sworn nemesis, Talen Horton-Tucker, and I was glad that you ended up doing that. I feel like he's going to be one of those no, yes guys all season. He's just that kind of player. He giveth and he taketh away. But quite a night. Hard to argue with the line. 14-7, 4, 2 steals, no turnovers is the big one, like you said. So that's huge. Okay, so 58 personal fouls called in this game. Every average, I looked it up because halfway through this, I'm like, this is stupid. I know it was sloppy, but it still felt so. NBA average is 38 per game, 19 per team. They called 20 more than the average. So this is the most penalized game of the season so far. I know he said it was sloppy play. I don't know. It took the air out of everything. That game should have been like 30 real-time minutes shorter than it was. It was so annoying to watch. Other thing, Lauri Markkanen, 24 points. That's his average so far this season. He's right at his average, and that seems sustainable to me. This feels like a next step season for him. I think that would be really great. Obviously, I think the Jazz want to hold on to him and continue to build around him because he's still young and he's great and can do a lot of different things. And it would be fun if he continues to do this. And he would have to average at least this, I think, to get some kind of all-star consideration. I would love to have them have an all-star the year they're hosting it. I would really love that. I think everybody would. The other thing with this game, I really like seeing Hardy experiment with lineups every night. Every night he's done that. He's trying to see what he's got. I think that it's nice that, they mentioned tonight the Jazz are like top 3 in bench scoring, and I'd obviously love to see that continue, and I think they're going to, because you notice that so many teams are top heavy and have just absolute garbage coming off the bench. We're always going to win the bench minutes. That feels really good, and because of that, I think we're going to win more games than I think some people want to, which also brings me to the general narrative and joke that Danny Ainge is so mad right now, quote unquote, is as stale as it is deeply untrue. Why would he want them to lose? Why would anybody in the front office want their new hotshot coach, why do they want them to lose games? You want to have your fans engaged, especially early in the season, and honestly, if the idea is to sell off Clarkson or Conley later, you want them playing well because that balloons their value, and a desperate contender or whoever, you can get them, at a premium if that's the route they're going. It's a win-win no matter what, and this is not a bad year, regardless of going in the tank or not, to have this many first rounders. I mean, this is an incredible draft to have multiple firsts, and they're in great shape no matter if the season goes, if they don't remain atop the West as they are right now in the standings. It's just fun. It's fun to be a fan. And like you said, I completely echo your sentiment. People that are being negative, they're just looking for reasons to be negative. If you can't have fun with this, we completely turned over the entire roster, and they're 4-1, and they're doing it in different ways, and they're playing really hard, and tonight wasn't as entertaining as other ones, but they're still winning. And I would rather have a team that wins and tries than one that just sucks. So.
Yeah, I'll take your point on the why would anyone be happy with this team winning, and I'll say like the broader comment is that I'll save that for like the column, right? I'm gonna write some notes on the broader sentiment that I've tried to speak on over the past few days. But I want to talk about your Lauri Markkanen comments with that, though. So you mentioned that Lauri Markkanen, like, he's a guy we want to build around for the future, right? 24 points, that's around his average. By the way, almost 9 rebounds a game, right? I wasn't expecting that, especially with the big lineups. He's often playing with Jared Vanderbilt. I wasn't expecting that. I think I'm surprised to see him rebounding so well. He's rebounded well in previous stops. When he was playing exclusively power forward in Chicago, he rebounded 9. He got 9 ball boards a game. But here on this team, where he's back to playing the pseudo 3-4 kind of spot, I didn't think he was going to get 9 rebounds a game. So that's been pretty fun to see. But what's interesting is that he's on a decent contract right now. But by the time the Jazz become a new contending team, in 2-3 years, whatever that ends up being, is Markkanen going to be a part of it? And the whole point about the team playing well, Markkanen playing so well, is my sneaky like deep conspiracy, not conspiracy, but like my deep thought is maybe this is too galaxy brained, but I'm not sure Markkanen is a part of the future. If he ends up being this good but not overwhelming all-star level, like, can you then convince another team to give 2 first-round picks for Lauri Markkanen, right? And then you sort of change your rebuild in a different direction. Winning is a really good thing for the Utah Jazz, not because of guys like Mike Conley and Jordan Clarkson, but that raises the profile of Malik Beasley. That raises the profile of Kelly Olynyk. That raises the profile of Lauri Markkanen. And Lauri Markkanen is youthful enough to be on the timetable where you consider, like, okay, is he a part of the future that the Jazz are going to have with other good players around him? Maybe. And let's see how he does throughout the entire season. But just because Lauri Markkanen is playing at a level I would say puts him as the 35th, 40th best player in the league right now, if you had to rank all the players based on how they've played and what you would reasonably expect, right? So like Anthony Davis has been playing like shit, but you would kind of expect him to be a top 30 player, top 20 player at the worst, right? Lauri Markkanen still probably slots in at like 40th, right? Maybe 35th, maybe 30th, right? If you're catching him on a great night. And how much more potential does he have after that? He's on a good contract now, but like, what does that look like going forward? I wouldn't be stunned, is all I'm saying, to see Lauri Markkanen get asset packaged for even more draft capital. I think it would be surprising. I don't think it's likely to happen. I think everyone is thrilled with the team winning. I think having a player like Lauri Markkanen is great for younger guys trying to learn the game a little bit. But like, what younger guys are really on the floor right now? Right? So you have a lot of Conley minutes, you have a lot of Clarkson minutes.
Kessler.
Yeah,
I think Kessler's a piece that I really hope. I want him to play for the Jazz for like 10, 15 years, man.
I do too. But like, Markkanen's not playing with Kessler, right? Like, when Kessler's on the floor, he's often the only big on the floor, or if he's playing with somebody else, it's he plays a little bit with Markkanen, but like, it's not like Markkanen's on the team to help a young ball handler learn how to play. He hasn't played a lot with Sexton so far based on how the rotations work. So I'm not sitting there relying on Lauri Markkanen to really like improve the boat of the offense and get them to run it. Right now, this is like just this team is just playing good, right? It's like a B- basketball team with good players who start and pretty okay players who come off the bench. And when they're all kind of flying around and doing the things that they do well, they end up beating good teams on the road. This is not... We've pretty clearly established, I think, through 5 games already, that this is not a bad basketball team as currently constructed. This is an okay basketball team. This is a 40 to 30 win basketball team. I started with the 40. I shouldn't have done that. You're all going to be pissed at me. This is a 30 to 40 win basketball team, right? Maybe more on the 34 or 35 end, but like, this team is just not bad enough to only win 20, 25 games. Whether that's a problem or not is what I'll write about. I'm trying to work...
Something I think is super interesting with Markkanen is you don't see, like, tonight especially, he gets to his 24. I think he had like 15 and a half. And Tony Jones pointed this out, and I said it was super interesting because he tweeted, he was like, he's got like 15 at this point. This is like right at half, and like did maybe run like 2 plays for him, right? He's just, he finds a way and has a bunch of different ways to score and to get to his number. That it just makes it him an exciting prospect that I hope continues to climb for the variety of reasons, right? Whether that's sending him off for picks, like you said, or other pieces.
Well, I think that's why his current value is a little bit questionable, because everything you're describing is a guy who's a dependent threat, and players who are dependent threats in the NBA just have They don't have as much value as guys who you can say, I'm calling a play for this guy because he's going to absolutely score more often in these various different sets. I think why I'm still intrigued about Lauri Markkanen is that when we do call his number, whether at the end of a shot clock or we just run a pick and roll with him, that guy produces. He has great dunks off the pick and roll with. He's already got pretty good chemistry with Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley. We saw a dunk with Clarkson today off the pick and roll. He's got great offensive feel. I'm not asking him to be the ball handler, right? And his post game is not something I want to see very often, except if he ends up playing the three a lot, maybe you get situations. But you're not sitting there being like, all right, calling a post up for Lauri Markkanen. And we saw in the first 3 games that we won that his handle is questionable at times. Like he'll just straight up dribble it off his pinky and not keep it tight. But he's good enough overall. If you watch Eurobasket, he's good enough to have the ball in his hands, at least as a capable guy who can mess up bad defenders. I really want to see more 4-5 pick and roll with Kelly Olynyk. I think would be really helpful to really gauge where Markkanen's ceiling value is at. Right now, we've seen, to your point, as a dependent threat, I've been wildly impressed. He can score from all 3 levels, and as an independent threat, we've seen him get the ball at the end of shot clocks and make things happen. He's got the height to shoot over guys. I've loved it when he has attempted, and so far he's usually missed, but he made one today. I love his Bogdanovich shot, where he's got a guy in his face, and he says, I'm 7 feet tall, and I'm going to shoot it anyways because I'm taller than my defender, and I will still have a clear shot to the rim, and my release is lightning quick. I want to see more of those because I think him establishing himself as an independent threat that you can throw him the ball and say, I'm getting points out of this possession against any defense in the league, that raises his value to be from a top 40-ish player, top 45 player, as he is right now, which, overall, you'd probably still rank him at 60, 70, right? Like, he's just playing like a top 40 player right now. All of a sudden, his ceiling as an independent threat ends up being one of those top 30 guys, and he's just not there yet. So I think we really have to couch like how well he's playing in 4 wins for Utah and being our best player versus is he really that much better than all the other guys on the team?
Totally. Let me ask you this, Mark, just switching gears a little bit as it pertains to Vanderbilt, because he would be that other piece that people would say that maybe the Jazz want to keep around and build around. But what would you set an over-under on games the rest of the season that he fouls out? Because good freaking grief, dude. That dude can't help himself. He cannot help himself. He's always going to be in foul trouble, isn't he?
Yeah, and we can end here talking about our friend Jared Vanderbilt. So a lot of his fouls have been because he's been playing more minutes and being put in situations that he really hasn't been in a lot. So he doesn't really get much burn in his NBA career until he gets to Minnesota. And then in Minnesota, he's playing alongside other players who are typically the ones setting the screens and running the actions, whether it be a Karl Anthony Towns or even like a Naz Reid in Minnesota. So Jared Vanderbilt is being asked to be a fulcrum of how the offense operates. Not as a ball handler, but like kind of how we thought of Rudy Gobert as the past few years. It's just the guy who's just involved in every ball handler's action. It's got a Jared Vanderbilt screen on it. And so he ends up being put in situations that he really isn't used to, going back to his days in Kentucky, right? Like, so he's never been like this guy who's just setting screen after screen after screen. And so combine that with his frenetic energy and how he approaches things, he's just running into players, and he's playing more minutes than he has before. I don't think he's going to foul out of every game, but I do think there needs to be like a come to Jesus moment with the coaching staff as far as like, okay, if this is when you're tired and you're running like you've been playing for 5 minutes and we're asking you to set a screen, like you need to throw a lot more energy that you have left in the tank that you're saving for rebounds or whatever, and just not foul the guy you're setting a screen on, right? I don't think he doesn't commit more fouls than usual on players attempting shots. right? Today, I thought he committed a little bit of a silly shot on a three-point shooter, but it was an inch away from not being a foul. So I'm not really going to worry about that one too much. But he doesn't really foul guys at the rim more often than your average player. He's certainly not above average. He fouls quite a bit at the rim on shooters. But I'm not worried about his shooting from that or his fouling from that perspective. It's everything else off the ball, right? So Houston ends up in the bonus with 10 minutes left to play in the quarter. So like you're ending up like just like holding your butthole, hoping that like we don't commit off-ball fouls. And Vanderbilt was on the floor for a lot of those 10 minutes to end the quarter. I think for like 4 or 5 of those 10 minutes, and he didn't commit a foul. Or he didn't commit an off-ball foul, right? So he's going to improve in that area. I don't have the stats in front of me to see if he has been if his fouls per 36 are insane or anything like that. But I'm pretty encouraged with his play overall, and I'm not too worried about the fouling going forward, but especially because of everything he provides on the court. So, Andrew, appreciate the questions here on Salt City Hoops. We're going to call it for today. And Friday we will not be doing a live postcast because I will be at the game in Denver. Tell me everything you want me to say to the guys. I'll be right behind the bench. Look for those. Look for my 97 Utah Jazz shooting jacket that I like to wear. And on TV, and oh man, I can't wait to see this one. If I have time, might do on Saturday or Sunday morning, talking about what I saw on Friday. But when I go to these games in Denver, I really just like to let loose and enjoy myself. Also, I also like seeing the Nuggets. They're a good team. Love to see Jokic up close, but I can't wait to see this Jazz team up close. The Jazz 4-1, everybody. Wow. They're a Western Conference leading 4-1, depending how the Trailblazers did today. How'd they do today? They were 4-0 going into tonight.
Dame got hurt in like the middle of the third quarter and had to leave, and I think that as I checked, the Heat were up. If the Heat win, the Jazz remain atop the standings of the West.
Yeah, did look like the Heat won today. So that you're after 5 games. Your Western Conference leading Utah Jazz going for the NBA title. And Andrew and company, thank you guys for tuning into Salt City Hoops live postcast. I'm going to finish this beer on the couch, watching the closing minutes of this Nuggets-Lakers game. And I'll see you guys on Friday, but I'll be on television, so say hello to me. And y'all have a good night, and we'll catch you next week sometime. Have a good one.